So I'm joined with Patrick Kennedy today to discuss his book, A Common Struggle, and his advocacy for mental health and addiction diseases. Thank you, Patrick, for being here with me and taking out the time. Your book, A Common Struggle, is such a raw and deeply honest memoir about your battles with mental health and addiction. Uh, your personal fight to quote unquote save beautiful minds and end stigma helped to lead to the passage of the Mental Health Parity Act in 2008, later then strengthened under the Affordable Care Act, making it illegal to discriminate against mental health and addiction treatment. As you write in the book, it was the equivalent of a medical civil rights act, a brain disease equal rights amendment. Yet this victory came after a long journey shaped by family dynamics, political pressure, and secrecy, what you called the enemy within. What kept you going during the moments when the fight for parity felt uphill and isolating?
Well, thanks, Dita. Appreciate your advocacy and all that you've done in your life to be transparent, tell about how these illnesses affected you and your family and the difficulty that you encounter just within yourself and, of course, within your family and community to be able to step forward like that and share something so painful, but to do it because you knew it would help change other lives that because frankly about these illnesses, they thrive in secrecy, and one of the things that makes all mental illnesses and all addictions worse is silence. It's the pathologizing of an illness where it just gets worse by our reactions to it, which further isolate people, and that's just not a good thing for anyone suffering from one of these illnesses, including their families, because these are illnesses that affect not just the individual, but it affects the whole family, and that's often lost in our whole medical model of treatment. We think of just treating, quote, the patient, and we forget that that person is within a family, and that whole family ends up suffering along with them, and that any recovery for that person it could be enhanced by having the family also kind of in recovery. And in any event, so the question you had was, what kept me going? I think that honestly, I wasn't really conscious and intentional at the time in terms of, oh, this is some big mission I'm on, and here's how I'm going to do it. It was kind of an accident of fate. As I say in the book, I became the sponsor of parity by default, and that is to say, no one else wanted to put their name first on a bill that had the words mental in it or addiction. And so I got to be the sponsor, and really it was because of my family name that I got outed because of the lack of secrecy, if you will, when you have the whole world trying to report on your family's life. Of course, they'll find out all the things that you don't want them to find out about. And the National Enquirer had broken a story about me being in drug rehab early in my political career. And instead of that being the reason that I left politics, it was the reason that I was able to enter political advocacy for mental health, because you see, my constituents reelected me in spite of that knowledge. And when they did, I didn't have the fear of being found out anymore because, of course, people already knew. And that gave me the freedom to be the sponsor, as I said, a parity and numerous other bills on behalf of those like myself and my family who suffered from mental illness and addiction. So I look back on my life now and I'm just so grateful. Things worked out the way they worked out. I couldn't have planned them to work out that way, but I do see God's hand in all of it. And of course, at the time, couldn't ever conceive that I was just trying to do the next right thing. And even amidst all the obstacles, I wasn't just conscious of God working in my life as I am today. And so, anyway, a lot of this is just looking back over your life. You start to see things for what they were at the time that you could never have appreciated because you were too close to the situation to understand what was happening.
Right. And you certainly had a purpose and mission, and perhaps you didn't see it until until you were deep in it. Because in your book, you talk about how at age 27, I think you were Congress's youngest member at the time, managing bipolar disorder, painkillers, alcohol for insomnia. And so you didn't speak about your diseases, and you were helping to pass these healthcare bills and supporting these bills, but you couldn't, because of that fear, because of that stigma, come out and talk about your own powerful story. That must have been eh, crazy, frustrating for you.
So, yeah, like in life, there's just layers of duplicity and delusion and secrecy. And of course, on the surface, of course, everyone knew I'd been in drug rehab. And even to myself, I felt like, well, I've already been to treatment. I should be all set, forgetting the fact these are chronic illnesses. And then I really was not at that point thinking about how I need to share with people that I'm still struggling because here I am trying to move this legislation and um, I don't want to undermine it. And I kind of, uh, so I just entered another layer of, you know, of a lie about how I was doing. So it didn't feel like I was free to talk about it. Um, and so anyway, it was what it was. When I did go to treatment, I'd go to treatment on my holidays. So like I went to treatment during Christmas because I didn't think anyone would care because everyone was busy with their families. I was
Mhm.
busy out in Rochester, Minnesota at Mayo Clinic, uh, getting detoxed. And so those are the kinds of things that I did to try to stay on track. And again, I would pick periods of time where I knew I could be gone from public sight and it not be a big deal. Um, so, and of course, I chose Mayo rather than Hazleton, which is also in Minnesota, because if people did find out that I was at Mayo, they might think I had some real illness, because of course that's
Mhm.
what people associate with Mayo Clinic. It must be real. So,
Interesting.
yeah.
I was wondering why it was our son went to Hazelden Betty Ford in Minnesota, and I was wondering why it was Mayo, not and not, a specialty place. I understand that now. Well, all of these experiences obviously gave you so much insight to then do the work that you did from just a different place than most. If I could ask you about your dear dad, Senator Ted Kennedy, who supported his family through hardship, served hundreds of thousands of constituents, and guided many leaders who looked up to him. But you talked about experiencing a lack of emotional connection with him regarding your struggles with mental health and addiction. You said you attended therapy to discuss topics you couldn't address with your dad and often felt torn between devotion and dejection towards him. How did this relationship affect your illness, your efforts to find your voice, and your then commitment to mental health advocacy?
Well, I grew up in an alcoholic home, and both my parents suffered from it. And my mother was completely paralyzed and debilitated from her version of alcoholism. My dad was very functional.
Mhm.
Um, and obviously the most prodigious U.S. senator in history for sponsoring more pieces of social legislation than any other senator in history. So, but he was dealing with trauma too, the trauma of his brother's assassinations and so much more. So, um, there was just, and he came from a generation where no one talked about this stuff. So
Right.
I think all of those things, he was very on a primal level. He was really good at hugging me. So he didn't have the words, probably didn't have the clarity of understanding this as a medical issue and not a moral issue. I think he probably felt a lot of uh, pain and remorse for himself and his own illness because he saw it as a moral failing that he
Mhm.
struggled.
Mhm.
Um, and so I don't think, like most of America, they really understood these are medical issues, not moral issues. And these are chemistry issues, not character issues. But but nonetheless, on a primal level, he would hug me, periodically, and it was, I look back and I think to myself today when I grab my children and I wrestle with them and I hold them tight. And even my 13-year-old who just got his braces off, I went in after he stood up. I gave him a big hug, told him
Yeah.
how what a handsome young man he was, and like that stuff my dad gave me.
Yeah.
Now we could never talk about these things, but he did what he could do at the
Right.
time, and
Right.
uh,
He's a wonderful, wonderful man. And you talk about how at that time people didn't talk about these things. I think even in recent years, our son struggled, really from 2010 until 2018 when he finally passed away, actually, when he was doing his best, unfortunately. We had a tough time understanding, and I have regrets about that. I think in your book you talk about your mom and how it was clear that she was struggling, but everything was becoming a new norm. And I think that happens a lot. It happened in our family. And I don't think we recognized Alex struggles with bipolar disorder and addiction sooner to be the disease that it was. And so, it does. I often wonder if there was something more that we could have done, you know, that he would be here today. But to that point, after sort of the hashtag mental health movement over the last decade, do you think we are in a better place in accepting mental health disease? Or is there still a lot of work to be done there?
well, there's a ton of work to be done. And we can't let this idea that, oh, now that we can talk about it more, fool us into thinking that we've actually even touched the surface of this issue. We have not appropriated the energies, the urgencies, the resources to this challenge, given the size and scope of these challenges to our public health and to individuals and families all over America, its impact on not only the medical system, but its impact on our criminal justice system and its impact just on our economy and every facet of life that we have in this country. So it's really something that we have not come to grips with, in my view,
Mhm.
much at all, in spite of the fact that I can obviously see a lot of people lauding the fact that it's a new world, everyone's talking and stigma's gone down. Well, if that's the case, why do less than 15% of Americans seeking mental health and addiction care get the evidence-based treatment that can get them better? We would never tolerate that if it were cancer,
Right.
cardiovascular disease, diabetes. Wherever you go in America, there are standards for care.
Mhm.
There are evidence-based treatments, and you receive them, and that's what's paid for. In our
Mhm.
system, first of all, you don't receive them because even though we have the parity law, care is often not paid for. And even if you do get it and it is paid for, in most cases, it's not the care that's going to help get you well. So that
Mhm.
to me is a major problem. So we
Right.
can't really take any satisfaction that we've come a long way. In
Mhm.
some respects, we have, but we're just so far away from doing what we need to do for all of those who are suffering.
Yeah, and that was our biggest frustration as parents is that healthcare protocols were so severely inadequate. We didn't know where to go, and we picked the what we thought were the best places, but um, then he would transition out and society was not set up. And even to this day, I think the majority of healthcare workers do not see addiction and mental health as diseases, the diseases that they are. So, the other question I want to ask you, as you say in your book, the comorbidity between substance use and mental health disorder is one of the best known in the history of medicine. Have you seen improvement in combining the research and treatment in that regard?
Right. So the thing that's really holding us back is that we don't have a full picture of someone's whole health because we have never subsidized, like we do in the rest of medicine, the incorporation of data around their mental health and addiction into their overall health care and outcomes. So we have a major chronic illness problem in our country, as we're all watching in terms of the costs, and yet we don't even identify, the impact of mental health and addiction on all the rest of healthcare and particularly other chronic illnesses, all of which have dramatically higher costs and disability associated with them when one does not incorporate and integrate mental health and addiction into the course of treatment, for whether it be cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, any other chronic illness. So the thing that I really hope in this new era that we're living in is that we can start to put the data to what we know intuitively. And that is that if you take care of someone's mind, their body gets better, their spirit gets better, their whole health and their lives get better. And that's reflected not just in the cost of healthcare, it's reflected in the productivity of a nation. And I think the data, when it shows the value of mental health, not just in medical care, but in all these other areas of costs in the economy, we are going to end up investing more in mental health care
Mhm.
because right now we only evaluate its benefit to us in a very narrow way. We don't track all the downstream savings to our criminal justice system, to the human services and social services systems, and into our economy and the workplace. We don't track any of those savings. And
Mhm.
if we did, we would
Right.
be making a much bigger investment up front in doing better interventions
Right.
and integration.
I think we could probably use a lot more investment in prevention all around, if you looked at it from a cost basis of if nothing else makes sense. And yes, I agree. We need to do a much better job. I wanted to ask you about May of 2006 because this was an event that was a crossroads for you, that fork in the road, what you call a win and a loss. You were taking prescribed, I think, Phenergen for stomach pain and Ambien for sleep, and that resulted in impaired driving in a crash at the US Capitol. And then that seemed to be that time when you finally had this clear sort of openness about your diseases and that you needed to speak about it and just come forward. And you described it as being both defeated and liberated. How did overcoming stigma impact you in that moment and from that moment on?
So, that was the last of three DWIs that I'd had. Had one, ironically, with the Coast Guard. I had one with airport police, and then one with the Capitol Police. And it was just one more, nod that I have a major problem. And so, of course, I dealt with it by acknowledging it and going away to treatment again. And in some respect, I came to a greater appreciation for the fact that my life is unmanageable. I mean, these, I was conceivably all right. I wasn't out drinking and using illicit drugs, but I wasn't all right. I was taking Ambien. I was taking this nausea medication, Phenergan, which changes your mood and mind. And the combination of the two clearly was not, but I was not. The point is that the insidious nature of addiction is that it can grab you when you least expect it. And because I was deluded into thinking I'm okay, because I'm no longer taking Oxycontin, I'm no longer washing it down with Jack Daniels, and I'm, that was a wake up call to me that, this thing has to be the layers of delusion and self deceit have to be torn away. And even at that time, when I did have a much clearer appreciation for how insidious this was, I still had not yet come to that moment of clarity in my life that I needed to change all of this
Mhm.
because I was still trying to manage public's reaction, still trying to stay in Congress, still trying to get reelected.
Mhm.
It wasn't until a few years later after that, when even though I had gone back to treatment after that DWI, I still ended up having to go to treatment like two more times before I ultimately got sober when I
Mhm.
left Congress. And it was a later period when, after my dad had passed away, I had this one moment, this piercing moment of clarity, totally by happenstance. I was talking to someone on the phone. I said, I don't think I can do this anymore. And they said to me, what do you mean? I said, I think I've got to leave Congress and everything I know because I've got to do something completely off track, completely unfamiliar. I had that intuitive sense that
Mhm.
something had to change fundamentally. And that was the real turning point for me. And it was just a conversation I had with someone one evening, and it led to me
Mhm.
not running for reelection, selling my house in Rhode Island and Washington, and going to 12 step recovery full time.
Mhm.
Uh, it was in a little town in South Jersey called Absecon. And me getting up every morning going to Trudgers, which is this terrific 12 step group in my area. Um, and then it took me picking a permanent sobriety date.
Mhm.
So,
Amazing.
which I did, and my life has been completely different since then.
Mhm.
I never picked a permanent sobriety date before. I never
Mm.
made that visceral commitment to change everything. And it was easier for me to make that commitment in every respect once I took myself out of the political world
Mm.
and out of everything,
So
out of
interesting.
every world, like out of my world in Rhode Island and everybody I knew, out of my world in
Mm.
Washington, and all the people that I knew. I totally disconnected and then
Mhm.
plugged into 12 step recovery full time. And that's what turned things around for me.
It's amazing. That's powerful because sometimes for some people, it could just be that is removing yourself from everything you know and replugging in somewhere else. And you had the blessing of your dad. I think in your book, he said, you don't have to do this anymore. You deserve to just go out there and find happiness. And all right. Well, I have one last question for you. In 1995, Patrick, during a trip to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, for the 30-year redaction of rededication, sorry, of the John F. Kennedy Warfare Center, you met General Hugh Shelton, who later became the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staffs. And he stated that special operations forces have superior mental health care because they consider it a force multiplier rather than just a safety net. What did he mean by that?
Well, in recovery, I learned the tools to do something called self modulate. which means I can manage my thoughts and my emotions and feelings by having tools to how to intercept the negative thinking and the self-defeating thoughts and the self-destructive thoughts. I have the ability to identify compulsions and obsessions early enough where I can interrupt those from, becoming realities. So it's about developing the skill set to manage my thinking. And you use cognitive behavioral therapy, essentially, which is what 12-step recovery is. So I have that. The Green Berets don't have 12-step recovery, but they have the same toolkit. And they don't give that toolkit to Green Berets because they're like me in recovery. They give those tools to Green Berets because they can't have a special warrior in the middle of some, dangerous operation have a intrusive thought. What does that mean? They're in the middle of an operation. Of course, they can't get it out of their head that they had a big argument with their spouse before they left on the operation, or their teenage child has just been caught with drugs, or something happened. Now that's in their head. That thought in their head could distract them from being fully aware of all of their fellows having their quote six with all of their teammates. And it could compromise the mission, and it could get either them or one of their teammates killed because it only takes a split second. And so the military has figured out that what makes a special operator special is that they have the ability to have their total focus on the mission, and they have the skills to manage these intrusive thoughts. When they said that to me, I thought, well, geez, I thought all of this is just for people like me who have, a mood disorder or an addiction. And I was so blown away that no, this doesn't have to be a narrative about negativity. Oh, we're just trying to keep people from, pathology. No. Having these skills is also about optimizing our capacity and our abilities. And that's what I find recovery is about. It's not simply not drinking and drugging anymore. It's about learning a way of life that is infinitely more productive than it would have been even if I hadn't had an addiction problem. Because now I have skills as a dint of my having to be in recovery that now make me a more productive person than I would have been even if I had never had an addiction. So that's the part that was so intriguing to me when General Hugh Shelton made that statement to me. So
Amazing. Yeah.
yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, thank you so much. Any last words that you can give, words of advice that you can give to our public health class soon to be graduating and on to being public health officials in terms of mental health policy or any other?
I would say that there was a great report just released out of Harvard Public Health. No offense to the Yale Public Health folks. Howard Koh and Dr. Kelly and Keith Humphreys from Stanford and Michael Botticelli, the former ONDCP director. They just released this meta-analysis of the role of spirituality in it dramatically increasing the rates of recovery. And so we are very clinical in our world and very medical. And I think that having the best psychiatrists and having the best physical physicians and knowing all very crucial to this. But this is a biopsychosocial illness. And we got the biological, we got the psychological. The social is also, in my view, spiritual because it's a connection to some power greater than ourselves, connection to other humans, and a sense of the divine, that we're part of a greater purpose in this world than we even know. And I think, to my mind, if I could give any advice, it would be that we not neglect the role of spirituality in our overall health, not just in mental health, but in our overall health. And I don't think, frankly, our system as can really figure out how to do that because we understandably have a very good separation of church and state, but I'm not talking about church here and
No.
religion, I'm talking about a spiritual way of living. And I think it's unfortunate a lot of people don't always understand that distinction and confuse the notion of a spiritual life with
Mhm.
a religious one, which it isn't. So anyway, that would be my only
I love
parting
that.
thought.
That's amazing. I love it. Thank you so much, Patrick. Thank you
Thanks,
for
Ada.
all the work you're doing and for your time and for inspiring all of us. Appreciate it and look forward to staying in touch and seeing what you'll be doing next.
Grateful to you and good luck with the degree.
Thank you.
All right.